We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which the podcast was made, the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the land's first storytellers and their deep connection to the lands, waters and seas. We pay our respects to elders, past and present.
Wanyari gaming gaurulko ya yagarajarana.
I love being surprised by the power of blackfellas and the new possibilities that we had not imagined, that weren't founded on the idea of what white people would accept.
I would say that most people that I'm yarning with are not feeling positive about the future, especially when I think about the state of affairs here in Queensland. But then you've got other people that are just like, it's all good. We've been through worse than this. We'll get through it.
How do we heal, protect our human rights and hold on to hope?
I'm not that interested in wanting to hear what the government wants right now. That'll come. That'll eventually come.
Right now, across the country, there is hurt. Deep hurt, carried not just in the headlines, but in the hearts. Hurt that echoes across generations. From frontier wars to missions to massacres. From stolen generations to broken promises. When the Voice to Parliament referendum failed and the truth-telling process in Queensland was dismantled, the effect of these decisions was deeper than politics. It was a re-wounding for some. Many First Nations peoples felt like they were being silenced again. And yet, for others, the voice was never the answer. But Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples have always been resilient. So this is not where the story ends. Because where there is pain, there is power. And where there is hurt, there is healing.
Whether it's healing of the mind, of the body, the spirit, Wananga Nuru, spirit healing, different things like that. That's not just human rights, it's self-determination, it's justice.
I'm Salua Middleton, a proud Torres Strait Islander woman with connections to Erub. This is Rights Made Real, a podcast from the Queensland Human Rights Commission. In this Gathering Strength series, we go and search for answers from First Nations community members. Episode 1, Healing, yarning with Mick Gooda, Gudja Kerry Charlton and other community members about how to uphold and protect the human rights of Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples to forge a path to self-determination.
I'm Mick Gooda. I've been around a bit. I'm a Central Queensland person. My mob are on my mum's side Gungaloo, so Woorabinda's actually on our country if you want a bit of a landmark, but it's about 40 minutes west of Rockhampton. You cross a river called the Gaganga River once you cross that John Gungaloo country. And you won't leave that for another 4 hours when you go across the Comet River. So that's my mum's side, and big connections in Woorabinda. Mum was born there. But on my dad's side, I'm Yemen, and that's mainly down near Taroom. So both my grandfathers were white fellas. One we knew, the other one we didn't know. I've only got 2 mobs. That's Gungaloo and Yemen. So yeah, that's me. My last 3 jobs were running a thing called the Cooperative Research Centre for Aboriginal Health in Darwin, which is now morphed into the Lowitja Institute. And when we did that, I left and I went and worked as the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner in the Australian Human Rights Commission. And just as I was finishing that, I got asked to do the Northern Territory Royal Commission into the protection and detention of kids, all kids in the Northern Territory. So I did a Royal Commission, then finished. So that's my life.
What a breadth and depth of experience you bring, and hopefully we'll get into some of that.
We'll get into it because
Yeah.
the other thing I did was spend 14 years in ATSIC. I'm an ATSIC tragic. I think if we had ATSIC here, we would not be in some of the trouble we're in right now. And a whole lot of us, young people at the time in the late 80s, signed up to ATSIC really for local decision making. That's what regional councils did. Of course, the National Commission was important, but not as important as local people having a say. My job is to make sure people are heard. The only place I can interfere with business is either on Gungaloo country or Yemen country. So I was on Palm Island once when I was commissioner, and we had a good meeting, and they asked me, "What would you do on Palm Island, Mick? You know, we're always in trouble over here." And I said, "Well, look, I got some ideas, but I got an idea what you shouldn't do." I said, "What's that?" And I said, "Ask me. I don't live here. I'm a Central Queensland person. So the answers for Palm Island, or the answers for Gungaloo country, or the answers for Yaru country have got to come from them. It can't come from someone who's got a job in Sydney." So I think in a human rights sense, that's so important that people are engaged in the conversation about them.
And so part of your role is, and in those past roles, is helping facilitate those discussions and opening that door.
Yeah, sometimes people need a bit of a hand to work out what they want to do, but at the end of the day, it's got to be them. It can't be outsiders.
We might have different strategies or different priorities, but I think the opportunity here today is to be all on the same page and want the same outcome, and that is for the rights of our people to be recognised.
What's giving me hope for future generations is we are becoming a lot more knowledgeable, standing up at a lot more of a younger age, speaking our truths, and just continuing to be here, still not going anywhere.
Self-determination is about our relationship with our footprints of country. All peoples have the right to self-determination absolutely relates to our right to be involved and to participate. So we've got to own it ourselves. It's not given to us. We have to take it up. The right to participate in decision-making about matters that affect us.
Mick Gooda, how's your spirit feeling?
Well, when you work in jobs like mine, I think you've got to be optimistic, and you've got to be optimistic that there's something better out there. Now, most times I don't know what it is, but I think we're going to be better when Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are seen as integral to this country and are valued. That's the thing that I think is out there. So, and once that happens, we'll start addressing those issues that bedevil us. So you've got to be optimistic, because people like the jobs I've occupied, if I'm not optimistic that there's something there, albeit realistic that we're in a bit of strife, I might as well roll my swag and go and do something else and let someone else come and do my job, because I think that's part of those jobs that I've held, to actually put it out there that there is something better out there. But I also say there are times when I curl up in the fetal position under the doona because it gets too much. I think all of us have those moments of doubt. But I figure it's like a turtle, eventually you got to stick your head out underneath that doona and come back into the real world and get on with it.
So what's your message to mob who might feel disillusioned after the rejection of the voice and that dismantling of the treaty legislation?
There's a concept of transitional justice around the world, and it's when societies move from oppression to liberalism, they're open democracies and all that. So people like East Timor's done it. There's, of course, the big one, South Africa, and Canadians have done truth-telling. But so have other countries, and particularly in Africa, they're doing truth-telling to move. And the thing that makes transitional justice work is truth-telling. To move from one state oppression to openness, the one thing that makes it work is truth-telling. So that's why I think we all benefit from truth-telling. And like, there's so many examples around Australia about it. It's the Myall Creek massacre celebration that happens every June. It's the first place non-Indigenous people got executed for killing Aboriginal people. About 20 years ago, people from both sides came together, and now there's no anger, there's no acrimony, there's no blame. It's just this happened. And the Aboriginal people I talk to, and I'm sure the white people feel the same, is we're joined forever. Because of that incident that happened here, our destiny is joined now.
And there's a sense of healing, isn't there?
It's a total sense of healing. That's why it's so important. It's both sides are healed from this.
When you think about gathering strength, what does that mean to you?
Well, we started talking about the referendum, and I think we're collectively traumatised by the outcome from the vote. And I think people who even voted no are traumatised by it. Like, for me, it was an awful thing that we put this country through to go to that referendum. So, and then to see the rejection and the calls I got, even within the next day on the Sunday, a young woman rang me and said, "Uncle, I'm living in a place where 81% of people voted no. How can I walk back on that street?" So it was this real effect that happened. And then within a week, a few days of that, the LNP opposition said, if we get government later this year, we're going to abolish the path to treaty process that we'd worked 5 years on. So we're all traumatised. And we're a bit lost because we got a new government. The first piece of action they did was to repeal the legislation that they voted for in May 2023. And so we're all recovering from it. We're recovering from the no vote, the quantum of people who voted no. And I don't care anyone says, I take that as a rejection of us. So then there's the knock-on effects of path to treaty. We're going to abolish path to treaty because people voted no in the referendum. Not that we voted on treaty or voice or truth. So that's gone. So we're traumatised. So what this does, gathering strength, is pulling us together, taking control of what we got control over. And the thing we got control over is how we go about this. I'm not that interested in wanting to hear what the government wants right now. That's it. That'll come. That'll eventually come. But right now, this gathering strength is us taking our strength back, taking our power back from what happened a couple of years ago.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner Katie Kiss points out that Australia adopted the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but says those rights are under attack.
Unfortunately, I think the status of Indigenous people's rights in Queensland is going backwards at the moment. We're seeing a willful opposition to and denial of rights in Queensland for First Nations people, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and we're seeing that specifically in sectors like child safety and out-of-home care, but also the youth justice detention space where, children as young as 10 are able to be locked up for crimes that potentially they don't even have the capacity to make mature decisions about. Development isn't at a level where they can make those decisions properly. We have a significant homelessness population. Housing is a human right. We have communities that don't have accessible drinking water or access to services that require good quality water. Water is a human right, and rights are not privileges. Rights are obligations, and we are rights holders, and we have to remember that, and we have to engage in that context.
I want to turn to UNDRIP now. What are the strengths and limitations of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples?
Human rights are only rights when you exercise them. They're not rights written on a piece of paper. So what we've got to take that declaration and say, how does that work for us? So it's self-determination, the right to participate in decisions that affect you, the respect and protection of culture, and the right to give or not give your free, prior and informed consent.
What role do human rights play in breaking the cycle of incarceration for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
If you look at the human rights instruments that we have, we always start with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, about 1948, that was developed, and then all these other rights came out of it. So things like right to a fair trial, and you'll find all those things in the Universal Declaration. So human rights actually, at that level, takes us to another place. So human rights are really important because it actually talks about, particularly at the moment we have this crisis in youth detention in Australia. It seems the governments treat young people, all young people, not just Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander young people, as the enemy, even worse than adult offenders. But we have a Youth Justice Act because we understand we've signed a convention in Australia called the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which guarantees these sort of rights within the justice system. So we use those as a way of taking us forward. And then you've got the other thing that makes that work is listening to experts, doing your research about what works. And, we got in Queensland adult time for adult crime. And I keep on reminding people, we also have a Youth Justice Act because we know offending with young people is totally different to adult offending. And that's why we have a criminal code for adults and we have a Youth Justice Act. But now we're blurring those lines and we should be arguing from a child, like the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Universal Declaration. There's a guy in New York that reformed the total youth justice system in New York from an overrun system falling apart at the seams. And we talked to him, his name is Vince Schiraldi, and we talked to him in the Royal Commission, we talk now even. And he said, the first thing I did was take advice from the experts and said, what you need is a home-like environment because we're having all this trouble in there. And we said, so what'd you do? He said, well, I didn't have much money, so I just jackhammered out the cement beds, replaced the toilets, stainless steel toilets with ordinary toilets people have in their homes, and put beds in that had doonas and mattresses, and immediately behaviour changed. And that's what the experts tell us, have a home-like environment, not a punitive system. So along with the rights, you've got to listen to people who know what they're doing and listen to them and take that on. So I think, but human rights leads to that.
Queensland Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Commissioner Natalie Lewis says there's been some progress in child protection, but not enough.
We're not in a good place, to be honest, and I think for me that is stark every single day because I work in the space of child protection and youth justice. So as a commissioner, I've got a role in terms of a statutory oversight of those two systems. And in those two systems, on an almost daily basis, I see almost a willful disregard of the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. And so when we look at areas like youth justice, we have an amazing Human Rights Act in Queensland, but it's been overridden twice. And in both of those occasions, it's been in relation to children. And the children who are most disproportionately adversely affected by that are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. One of the biggest concerns for me right now is, the children that we have in custody, in watch houses across the state. Children who the denial of the most basic human rights, our most vulnerable children, essentially being caught up in what has been really, a political discourse around tough on crime, around this sort of demonising of children and young people as sort of the cause of every harm that's happening in communities. And so our inability as a system to be able to see them as rights holders and to respond to them with compassion in equal measure has just not been part of the landscape in the last 18 months.
What do you see as the most urgent human rights issue facing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today?
It's being able to participate in decisions that affect you. Because I can run off youth justice, I can run off housing, I can run off employment. I'm not that interested in what government wants right now. But what I am interested in is what we want. And that's what we should control. That's taking our power back. And that's not even considering. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, because the purpose is eventually to have a relationship with government. But right now, what we've got to do in that room is actually get ourselves together. And that'll form all sorts of healing. That we've taken control back. That we're going to get over the trauma of the referendum.
We do have a newly re-elected Prime Minister and a new Queensland Premier. What's your message to Anthony Albanese and David Crisafulli?
It's the same message I give everyone. That's listen to us. Listen to us on the big issues, like the broad strategic issues. But then you've got to go and listen to communities.
What does healing mean to you personally?
It all depends what context you're talking about. I think we've all got to heal. Like I say to, particularly the right wing say that them blackfellas just got to get over it. Just get over it. And I say to them, you know what? I really want to get over it. I want to get over that my mum lost all of her money when she was a domestic, taken from Moorabbin and was when she's 13, 14 to become a domestic in these cattle properties, and lost 80% of her money in the stolen wages. Now, I would love to get over that. But guess what we're doing in the Northern Territory at the time? We did income management. So we're still managing people's money. I'd love to get over that. I'd love to get over the stolen generations, but we've got now more kids in care than when Mick Dodson wrote his report. So I'd love to get over the stolen generation, but that's still happening. And so I think for one level, healing is that for me. It's actually looking deeper into what's happening. So I think that's part of healing. Truth-telling is a part of healing. Apology is a part of healing. We helped write the Queensland Healing Strategy when I was on the first Children and Family Board. And I said, we need experts in each department on healing. Well, why don't we just treat people decently? Why don't we just... That would be a very big part of healing. You've got to leave some of the stuff, baggage behind you, but you can't do it unless the truth's being told and people are giving commitments not to do it again. And then we can move on, and hopefully the whole nation becomes healed out of this, because it's not just for us. Then white people have got to heal. Jackie Huggins and I talked about during the part of the treaty process, a number of non-Indigenous people want to come and tell their stories about what happened to them, what their families did. It's almost, I'm a Catholic, it's almost like confessing your sins and then you can move on. So healing is for everyone. It's not, even when we did the healing strategy, the first thing we said in it, the healing strategy's got to address everyone's healing in Queensland, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Queensland Human Rights Commissioner Scott McDougall says we're going backwards when it comes to protecting Indigenous human rights.
Government needs to recognise that Queensland's First Nations communities have the right to continue as a people. So that means establishing a formal mechanism of engagement with First Nations people. It's completely unacceptable in today's age. There's no way of gaining input formally from First Nations communities to address issues. So I think it's essential that we move away from the current policy settings, which essentially just ignore Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, don't pay any respect to their rights to exist as Indigenous people, and establish some sort of relationship which is just foundational to good governance.
In my community, initiatives that are working is programs that involve being connected to country and culture. So whether it's traditional dance, learning the stories, going out on country with elders, looking after country, language, practicing and learning that, speaking it as well, and having safe places to go to, whether that's in community or in school or any other space that isn't meant for them.
I think you realise how much progress we've made. You also realise how significant of body of work that all of our old people have done, all of our elders and emerging elders as well. Like, things have not been easy for us, and for me it's really important to know where we've come from. It's to be grounded in that, to understand the strategies, to understand the mindsets, to understand the drive and the way in which people have conducted themselves to be able to get to a point where we are today in 2025. There's still a long way to go.
The right to speak your own language is at the heart of the work of Gudja Kerry Charlton. She grew up hearing her grandparents speak in language and wants to keep those words alive for the next generation. She says that having access to your ancestral language is a fundamental human right.
I am Gudja Kerry Charlton. I am an elder from Yagara country, and my tribes are the Gurunpul and Jandawal, Giri, and also Mudjinbara of West Yagara. I'm also part of the Kabi Kabi Nation, our northern neighbour, and we're part of the Quandamooka peoples as well. My work is centred around language and culture, repatriation and projects, so lots of naming buildings or programs, or also teaching language program in the community. In collecting the language, we're also collecting knowledge and culture, and so where there's gaps in our knowledge, we're now able to fill that out to complete where there's missing information.
Can you explain the meaning of Bandaran Maragu?
Bandaran Maragu. Bandara is our word for strong or for strength, and then the suffix, so the suffix go turns the word into a noun, into a verb. So we've got Bandaran, which is the strength part of it, and then Mara is hand. And so Maragu and go is the suffix, which then makes it into a doing, into a verb. So we're gathering. And hand can be used, in a context of, when your mother asks you to hand me that towel, or, so we're using it in that respect. So we are gathering, and we're gathering strength.
Can you briefly tell me the story of how you learnt your mother tongue?
Well, my mother, from my mother, and because my father's was a 5-pound pom from Northern England and Scotland, really, and a bit of Irish, so Gaelic background from Dad. And so I grew up with him talking and his way of talking, and Mum and the family. But because none of his family were here, it was mostly all our family talking language, sign language, facial expressions, silences, but you had a whole conversation with them eyes and listening a lot.
So obviously you had access to your language, your native mother tongue. Do you believe that having access to your ancestral language is a human right?
Absolutely. How our psychology develops, how our culture develops, our worldview, our understanding of the environment around us, that's all to do with language. It is a basic human right to have your language. I've often heard it said, from people who've survived really, really harsh incarceration during the war or in war camps, and they talked about that it was their mind couldn't be stolen from them, and they were able to survive through that process of what they could do with their mind and their thinking and talking, their self-talk we have a right to that, and to be able to think in your own language certainly connects you to your country and to all your history.
And does the loss of language have an effect on a sense of identity and well-being?
Yes, absolutely. Through no fault of our own, some of us have had the language removed due to the policies and the breach of human rights here in this country and the Aboriginal Protection Act. So for the early decades of the Aboriginal Protection Act, people still could speak their language, but then they changed around the 1920s and 1930s, and it was to assimilate into English. So, I had my grandmother's people were brought down from the Gulf country, and a lot of them were put onto Cherbourg, and some ended up on Stradbroke. And they couldn't, you had to stop that language, and the children were put in the dormitory when they became school age so that the parents could be sent out to work and all that. And to not have your own language to even talk amongst each other. When I think about us growing up and some of the younger ones who come along and didn't learn it like we learnt it, they learnt bits of it, I think that we still taught culture very strong and lived culture, but once they start doing the programs, it's like it just wakens up endorphins in their brain, cultural endorphins open up, and that's it, they just want to talk it more and more.
The thing that lights my spirit up the most is when I get to travel back on my country and into my community. So I currently live in Cairns, so rainforest country, and the sea there. So then driving all the way home, seeing the landscape change from rainforest to bush to then the rugged hills of Kalkadoon country, that I can feel it in my spirit that I can feel the sense of relaxation, and then I'm driving back home and it's like, a sense of this is where I belong, and that every time I do go back on country and, plant my feet in the red dirt, I look out and I can see that this is what is the most important thing for us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is continue to ground ourselves and tell our country what is going on.
How does language connect to justice and self-determination for First Nations people?
I can't think of anybody from anywhere in the world who, if somebody came and said to them, can we take away your language and culture? Or would you be happy if you just only speak English and read our English books and learn our history and our curriculum, blah, 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 blah. You can only do the jobs that we do. You can only celebrate the dates that we say. You have to only use one flag. I can't see anybody saying yes to that. So self-determination and language linked to human rights, it's the cultural way, it's the processes within us, within our mind, our thinking and our intellect, but it's also to do with, we've been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. There is a way of thinking and looking at things, and that goes back to our construct, and that's flowing in our blood non-stop. My grandmother would tell us little stories which would help us to understand better about oppression or about how we needed to behave in front of dug-eyes, white fellas, at the school or at the shop or wherever. And then we'd have little language words to say amongst ourselves which helped keep us strong in those times. And I think that's not just human rights, it's self-determination, it's justice, but it's being who you were born to be.
Some of the concepts you've shared with us today talk a bit about healing. Is there a word for healing that you have or use?
There's a word for knowing, understanding, and so winyanga. And then it depends what you might put as a suffix or a prefix, whether it's healing of the mind, of the body, the spirit, Wananga Nuru, spirit healing, different things like that. And when you start with, like, language, it's just not sitting down looking at lists. If ever you learn a language, you have to learn about that country, about the way the language is used. Then you start to learn the foods that they eat and the culture and the practices and customs. And that's what happens when we're learning our own language here.
I can see you lighting up when you're talking there. So what does it feel like, to speak in the language of your ancestors?
It's fulfilling. It's satisfying. I think it fills a hole. It's like quenching a thirst, because as little ones we fell asleep listening to, sometimes the grannies would be singing, or we'd go to sleep, like a lot of us, we'd fall asleep while the adults are talking, and they would be using English and language, and remembering some of the tunes and now translating some of the audio that was taken of grannies and understanding what they were singing. That really connects me. I'm 66, connects me back to my granny, who was early 80s, 80, and that would take her back to when 80 years before, when she was tiny. So that's how the transmission is, how that intergenerational connection, and then that brings intergenerational healing as well.
Finally, do you have a word for thank you?
Well, there's a couple of words, right? Marumba. Marumba Downs.
Yep.
But it's really Marumba.
Marumba.
And so that's a word for all the positive things. Marumba. Good.
Healing, with thanks to Mick Gooda and Gudja Kerry Charlton. In episode 2, Talking, what do we as mob need to be discussing, and how can we listen to each other as we build a path ahead and protect our human rights? Gathering Strength is Series 1 of the Rights Made Real podcast. It's a series of yarns with First Nations community members about how to uphold, promote and protect human rights of Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Make sure you're following Rights Made Real in any podcast app to find all the episodes of this Gathering Strength series. You can also head to the Queensland Human Rights Commission website to find out more. Thanks to the other participants in this episode, including Professor Chelsea Wadigo, Mundanara Bales, Mina Waller, Kobe Page, Joanne Schmider, Dr. Alicia Vesey, and Manny Williams, along with Commissioners Katie Kiss, Natalie Lewis and Scott McDougall. Rights Made Real is supported by the Queensland Human Rights Commission and produced by Dead Set Studios. The executive producer is Kelly Reardon, supervising producer is Rebecca Livingston, and our editor is Liam Reardon. Theme music was composed by Clay Casadale, and I'm Salua Middleton.